Hello and welcome to Produced By. Just quickly before we begin, if you enjoy the show, please consider supporting it by joining our Patreon. You can choose from a list of memberships and will receive some exciting rewards. Thank you, and back to the episode. Hello Chris, thank you for joining us today and welcome to the show.
Hi Thomas, and thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me on your podcast. I'm honored to be a guest.
It's my pleasure. So Chris, can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Chris Ong. I am now a sales performance coach and as part of that, a Brazilian jiu-jitsu instructor. So that's kind of like my main profession at the moment. Prior to that, I had 15 years of experience in corporate sales, working for a number of different blue chip consumer goods companies. And my experience was mainly focused in account management. So managing the day-to-day relationship commercials with some of the big retailers in England and the UK. I've done some international sales roles within that as well. But yeah, I kind of shifted out of the corporate scene a couple of years ago to move into, I suppose more of a coaching type of role, whether that's looking at helping sales professionals, so people I used to work with and people who I used to be. But of course, alongside that, my major passion in life is martial arts and particularly Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So I teach multiple times a week, gi and no gi as well. So yeah, that's me essentially.
Yeah, we'll dive into it deeper later. Also, we'll be curious, why did you make this career change? But I always like to start kind of with your background and with your beginnings. So can you tell us where are you from or what was your childhood like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm born and raised in the United Kingdom, in England. My parents, my father is from Malaysia, Chinese Malaysian, and my mother is in the Philippines. And they met in this country in the early 1970s when they both came over here to work in the National Health Service. So they were both nurses. And then, so for me, then I was born in 1984. In terms of my childhood growing up, I had a really good childhood. I have a sister as well. Amazing parents, supported very much so in terms of financially, but also with regards to them encouraging me to try lots and lots of different things. So as I grew up, I played a variety of different sports, including, in fact, like my first journey within martial arts was karate, actually. So my father got me into karate, but like he always was keen on me from a spectator point of view, watching boxing growing up in the 90s. So, I watched lots and lots of boxing before I ever kind of started watching mixed martial arts and UFC. But yeah, played the kind of typical sports at school in England, the popular ones like football or soccer, as people outside England would know it. But yeah, so mainly soccer. And athletics, and then and also for me, I suppose from an art point of view, I've always just kind of been able to draw, so to speak. So yeah, I'd say that's my background. I funnily enough, I did a degree in law from 2004 2000
completely different
and 7. Yeah, something completely different. But I kind of figured out pretty early on that I didn't really enjoy law and I didn't necessarily want to get into it as a career. And sorry, very highly competitive space.
What was the reason for you studying that in the first place?
So I think I was at school, like my favorite subjects outside of art, and I had it in my head that, you can't really make a career in art. And I think, my parents were quite keen for me to get a professional type of job. Outside of art, my favorite subjects were history and then economics. And, kind of talking to career advisors at school and not knowing exactly what I wanted to do, they advised potentially getting into law. So kind of applied to do a law degree and I got accepted into Sheffield University. And then from there, I did a 3-year law degree got my degree. As I say, I pretty much figured out straight away that it wasn't something that I wanted to do as a career. So as soon as I graduated, I started applying for commercial graduate schemes, basically. And that's how I got into sales.
Mm-hmm. And why didn't you try to pursue your artistic career? Or you
It's a really
still
good
felt like it's not really possible?
It's a really good question. I think I felt that, yeah, I think I felt that it wasn't possible. I think I felt like it was just purely a hobby and a passion and not something I would ever be able to make money out of. And it's interesting because my sister went the other way. So she pursued a career in shoe design, and she's
Oh, yeah.
artistically she's more talented than me. And these days, I'm starting to use a lot more of the kind of Adobe Illustrator programs, and she's helped me kind of get up to speed on that kind of stuff. But it's interesting because she went down that route, and I would say that she has more happiness in her career than I did working in sales. And
Yes.
I think it took me to get to a certain point in my life where I realized that the job satisfaction and feeling that I was making the contribution I wanted to in society, and also kind of getting to the point where I was fulfilling my own potential. That it took me honestly until probably about a couple of years ago, 2 to 3 years ago, that I realized that was starting to become more important as opposed to just kind of status, money, and doing the thing that I probably thought that was kind of more socially acceptable.
Yeah. And also, similar question, but weren't you thinking about pursuing career in martial arts or sport?
You know what? It's exactly the same as art. I think it was something that I very much enjoyed. So I did karate from the age of, I would say, 6 to 13. And then I became
from
obsessed.
6.
Yeah, so karate. But then I became obsessed with football. So I think at the age of 13 to 18, it was just like football. So I parked martial arts for a while. And then when I was around like 19 years old, the UFC was obviously nowhere near as popular in 2003, 2004, 2005 as it is now. But it was starting to become more prominent on the satellite TV channels in the UK.
Yeah.
And so I was starting to develop a bit of an interest in that. And obviously I was a big fan of boxing in the 90s. And so that's what led me to start Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But I think there's another reason for that. Like for me, I felt that I was an okay athlete, like picking up on things quite quickly with regards to athletic pursuits. I thought I was relatively quick. And kind of had like decent hand-to-eye coordination for things like racket sports and football. But when I started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, that was like completely different. I felt that I had zero talent for it, and I think that was part of the reason which kind of kept me coming back to it. And I still don't consider myself to be particularly a particularly great or good athlete with regards to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But in some ways, I think that makes me a better instructor than I am an athlete, because I think I have to break things down to the nth degree to be able to make that work in my game. But as I say, like it was just very much a hobby, and never something that and when I started, to be honest with you, Thomas, I never thought I would achieve a black belt. I thought I started back in 2006, and I thought it'll be amazing to get to a blue belt. When I started back then, there weren't many blue belts in the country. But then I just thought to myself, and again, it leads back to, I suppose, the expectations that I had with regards to societal acceptance. I just thought, well, I'd get to a point in jiu-jitsu where maybe blue belt, and then I'd have to stop training, because from a commercial and a corporate career point of view, that would take over and I wouldn't have time for it. And at least I acquired some skills and I'd be able to kind of defend myself if I got into some sort of altercation. And that's where I was with it. But the way that it worked out, I just kind of kept showing up. And then, after 11 and a half years, suddenly I was awarded my black belt. And then I think it wasn't until that point that I started to gain some aspiration around, okay, like it'd be good to give back and it'd be good to try and teach. And that's kind of,
yeah,
it wasn't up until that point.
after you became blue belt, right? Oh, black belt, right?
Black belt, exactly, yeah. So I did like the odd bits and pieces of a bit of teaching at brown belt, but nothing serious and very sporadic. So it wasn't until black belt that I started teaching more consistently.
Yeah, and I'm curious, when you started with jiu-jitsu, how big was the sport in the UK, or how popular?
So when I started jiu-jitsu, that was February 2006. So I was just turned 21. I'm 40 this year, so crazy to think I've been training jiu-jitsu for over 18 years now. Yeah.
I think it's amazing that you managed to stick for such a long time and still enjoy it.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because I think going back to your original question. So when I first started, I think I was quite fortunate. So I was at university in a city in, I say it's in Yorkshire, so more northern England. And there was one club there, which was, I probably had to take sort of a 20-minute tram ride from where I lived in student accommodation. But you know, like if you consider that it's a big city, you know, that was like the only club in the city, and it was a jiu-jitsu club, and also I think they had a shoot fighters club as well there. So people who wanted to train more specifically for MMA and kind of no-gi grappling. So when I started, I think but so here's some context. Like the instructor there was a 2-stripe blue belt. You know, I think there were 2 other blue belts there when I started, and he was the most senior. The rest of them were white belts. So I would say the class size when I kind of first started maybe was consistently like 11 or 12 people. So small class size. And it's interesting because I talk to a lot of beginners who struggle, and they kind of seek some advice from me. And, you know, they're kind of two months in their journey, and they're like, I feel like I'm getting smashed up by everybody. I can't submit anyone. And the thing that I point to is that I think when I started in 2006, because it was such a small class and you didn't have new people coming through the door regularly, it took me a good 5 to 6 months before I actually tapped anybody, because it was the same people in the class, right? So everybody's learning the same stuff. YouTube wasn't popular back then, so you couldn't go on the internet and kind of find instructionals to try and self-direct with regards to your own learning.
Yeah.
And so you just learned the same things that everybody learned in class, right? And I think the first person I tapped was basically a new person joining up, hadn't done any jiu-jitsu before. And then suddenly it's like, oh, you know, I can start some of these moves that these techniques and positions I've been learning. Now I can actually pull off on this new person, whereas like I couldn't, you know, score any of that stuff on anybody else in class. So that gives you some context as to the size of the sport when I started.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I wasn't expecting that, and I cannot really imagine what was it like, because I'm not sure if that's just my perspective, but I feel like that jiu-jitsu or grappling has been getting more and more popular recently, both thanks to UFC and, you know, some big grappling fighters. Or what do you think?
No, I agree. And I think it's interesting because I think the sport has definitely become more mainstream now, which, and, you know, I think the UFC has moved away from this. I don't think people necessarily, the general public, will consider it to be as brutal as they did around sort of 2005, 2006. You know, it's a proper regulated sport now. It's not this no hold barred type of thing.
Yeah.
But one thing that's very interesting is that, so for me, in some ways, I think that's kind of diluted it slightly. Now, what I mean by that is, I think back in the day, so between 2007 and 2009, particularly in 2007, the UFC decided they were going to make another push into England, the English market and the UK market. So I believe the first event in the UFC in England was the Brawl at the Albert Hall, which was like UFC 38.5. I think that was like 2002. So that was before I had any interest in MMA or knew anything about it. But the next time they came back to the UK was in March 2007, and they had an event at in Manchester. So I'd started jiu-jitsu by that point, and so I went to to spectate at the event, and it found.
Oh, you did?
I
Wow.
did, yeah. So I attended quite a few UFC events between 2007 and 2009. So the most memorable UFC event I can think of is I went to the Newcastle event at the Metro Arena when BJ Penn won the UFC lightweight title against Joe Stevenson. That was incredible because at that point, BJ Penn in 2008 was my favorite fighter.
Yeah.
But what I found is like between 2007 and 2009, 2010, like the crowds were, most of the people who went to those events trained, right? So like if you were sitting with people around you, other spectators would be knowing what was going on with regards to the ground, the grappling, that kind of stuff. Now, I went then from sort of like 2009, 2010, all the way up until July last year, 2023, would not go into a live UFC event. And then when the UFC came back to London, so I think it was Tom Aspinall versus Marcin Tybura last year. I went to that event at the O2, and I took my dad to the event because he hadn't been to a UFC event before. And the event sold out super quickly, so I was lucky to get some tickets. But what I did find
I actually remember I was trying to get tickets as well, and it was impossible.
It was impossible, yeah. So I think I had somebody who was able to kind of get me a ticket as part of. He kind of has connections, right? People have connections, and he had like a friend of a friend who could get. So I managed to get 2 tickets. But what I found is that kind of the difference between the last time I saw it in 2010 and then now 2023 is that because it's got so much more mainstream, like people, like I didn't find there was anybody, I would say, in sort of a 100-meter radius, because you can hear people shouting things that they're kind of really trained or knew what was going on with the grappling stuff, So, because my dad was asking me questions, and I could see that as I was talking to my dad, well, this is happening there, and he's trying to connect his hands and grab, take down on the fence and whatnot. I could tell that people around me were kind of tuning into my conversation a little bit because they didn't know what was going on.
Everyone listening.
Yeah, so it was very interesting to see the evolution of the sport that way. That yes, it's got so much bigger, but then if you looked at it sort of 14 to 16 years ago, it was a very hardcore fan base who were very who had esoteric knowledge of the sport. Whereas now, when you look at it, and it's more mainstream. Conor McGregor, Ronda Rousey brought so many more casuals. I say casuals like in a good way because it's built the revenue and the popularity of the sport. But it has I think the dynamics changed in that sense, which was very interesting for me to see last year.
Yeah, to be honest, I was expecting something like that there will be people that the sport is becoming kind of more mainstream rather than these diehard fans.
Yeah.
But also the question before, maybe you mentioned it and I missed it, but what was the reason that you chose specifically jiu-jitsu over some other sports, like maybe some stand-in or something else? Because you were watching MMA, so you could do maybe something different?
Yeah, so great question. I'd done some karate growing up, so I felt like I had some knowledge of standing. And then when I was at university, I was also, whilst I started jiu-jitsu, so I will say that the first sort of 18 months of my jiu-jitsu was very inconsistent training because I was doing it at the same time as studying and going out and partying with my friends. Sometimes I trained twice a week. Sometimes I would train once every 2 weeks, once every 3 weeks. So it was like dotted all over the place. But during that time, I was also doing a bit of boxing as well at university at an unlicensed gym and a bit of Muay Thai as well. So I was kind of trying to train all 3 things together with a mind that I think I had it in my head at the time. So like, I'd like to have like maybe one amateur MMA fight in my life to say that I've done it. Now that never materialized, but for me, that was kind of where my head was at, right? But again, with regards to like Muay Thai, with regards to boxing, I felt like I'm by no means good at either of those martial arts, but I felt that I would pick up on that stuff a lot quicker than jiu-jitsu. And jiu-jitsu was just so foreign, I think, because when I was watching MMA, it was I'd watch it, and in the early days before I did jiu-jitsu, not understand what was going on the ground, but then think to myself, like, God, if somebody put me there in a self-defense situation, I wouldn't have a clue about what to do, and I'd just be completely lost. I'd be at their mercy. So I think for my mind, it's like, right, well, I really like the UFC, and obviously when you first get into it, you follow the journey of Royce Gracie, UFC 1, 2, 3, that kind of stuff. And I just thought to myself, well, it's an effective. Yeah, and when you look into it as well, and people know that so many kind of street fights will end up on the ground at some point. That's what got me into it. Really, it's kind of like I didn't want to have be so exposed in one area of kind of combat sport, so to speak. So that's why I got into it essentially.
Yeah, that makes complete sense to me, and I understand. So then, as you continued with jiu-jitsu, how did you manage to balance it with your professional career?
Yeah, so I think for the first few years of my professional career, so I would say 2008 up until 2015. So the first kind of 7 years, I would say that I was in sales roles, which were busy by all means, but a lower level of responsibility within those organizations. So that's, it tends to be the way when you, so, like the first job I worked for was for PepsiCo. So, but not the drink. Interestingly, the kind of Pepsi drinks are kind of owned and distributed by Britvic in the UK. But PepsiCo,
Also, different company.
yeah, but PepsiCo in here and in America, they're basically in charge of Walker's or Lay's potato chips.
Okay, yeah.
It was Tropicana previously, but I believe they sold that arm of the business a couple of years ago, and then Quaker Oats. So, but the Christmas snacks business is the biggest part of PepsiCo. They've got the number one Christmas snacks business in this country, and I believe in the USA as well. So, working for them, I kind of started out managing, like, in the field sales, and then kind of being promoted to manage like smaller wholesale accounts. And when you're kind of in that type of sales, account management, you're working your way up to managing one of the big supermarket accounts. So like the biggest supermarket account in this country is Tesco, right? So I think from getting into that industry in 2008 all the way up until I would say 2014, 2015, it wasn't until 2014, 2015 that I started to be promoted and given the responsibility to look after supermarket accounts. And those supermarket accounts, like, the top four supermarkets in the UK, Sainsbury's, Asda, Tesco, Morrison's, Asda, those accounts are more time consuming because there's more responsibility. You're expected to be with the customer more often. And so it wasn't up until that point, I felt like consistently with jiu-jitsu, I was able to balance it and train at least 3 to 4 times a week. Right. So then, 2008, I got my blue belt in 2008. I then moved geography. I moved to London, so I had to go train somewhere else. And then I got my purple belt in 2011. And then I got my brown belt in 2013. But I think a bit of a tipping point came 2015 when I was kind of looking after a big supermarket account. At that point, I was working for Johnson & Johnson. I felt that like the constraints on my time, my free time to train were starting to become more squeezed because I was having to spend more time at work, right? So then I would say that I still managed to balance it a little bit from 2016 to 2015 to 2018 to at least train a couple of times a week. But then I took a job, an international sales job for a pet food company, like a small, medium-sized enterprise in 2018. That job, required me to manage like not a large team, but sort of 4 people in my team. But also the difficulty with that was having to do a lot of international flights. So a lot of the customers I would have to visit would be in Southeast Asia and Europe. So then at that point, I found I was training maximum once a week. And that really kind of, for me, it kind of got me to a point where I really feel like between 2018 and probably 2022, in these kind of really stressful, busy roles, I'd say that I didn't feel like my jiu-jitsu progressed. I felt like quite stagnant. I kind of would be able to stay competitive with decent people, but then you would see the people who were training five days a week, start to go way past way past you, so and also, from a fitness point of view, that was starting to affect some of my fitness as well, right? Like, like training jiu-jitsu once a week, maybe going to do some strength and conditioning once a week and going for a run. It's very
Yes.
very different to what I was doing previously. So that's kind of how I balanced it. And I'll say that was the point. 2022, I was starting to get tired and very stressed in the industry. That was the year that my daughter was born, and I felt like I needed to try and do something else. And part of that reason was I think my unhappiness in the corporate career was because I wasn't able to really train jiu-jitsu, because the times I was training jiu-jitsu, I was actually teaching. So if I was training one day a week, that was the class I was actually teaching. So there was no space, there was no room for my own personal development within that.
Yeah. And when you traveled somewhere, was it possible to try to train over there, or not really?
More often than not, no. But I do have an interesting memory. I had a business trip to Singapore. I believe it was August or September 2018. And near my hotel, there was a club, and visiting customers all week. But I was staying there over the weekend as well with another colleague. So on that Saturday, I was his manager, and I said, "Look, let's not do any work on the Saturday. You go do what you want. I'll go and do something in the day, catch up for a drink in the evening in the hotel." And I found there was a club. If I jumped in a taxi, about 20 minutes away. So I went to the club, and to drop in for a no-gi session, because I very much no-gi is my preference. It has been for the last 6 years or so. I train way more no-gi than gi these days. But I went to a no-gi class there, dropped in, paid the money, and then as I was signing the form, he kind of looked at it and he said, "Oh, you're a black belt." So then he said, "No, I'm going to take your money back." And then he said, "You get to train for free. You're from your Roger Gracie Academy affiliate," which is really nice. Yeah. But I went into the no-gi class, and it was a purple belt teaching. I think there's about 9 people in there. And anyway, so they introduced me. I shook hands with the guys, and then the funny thing with that was they said, "Oh, can you take the lesson?" So I was kind of like, man, I was just coming in to train. I wanted to get some sparring, and now they're like, this is an hour and a half. We're doing back takes and back control, like.
I was waiting for that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I ended up like taking the lesson. So then it was funny because I didn't get to spar anywhere near as much, because they're like, "Can you look in and what we're doing?" And they wanted to do a lot of positional sparring. I think I believe in Singapore at the time that a lot of the Eddie Bravo Invitational rule sets were popular in the no-gi scene. So they were very much looking at how do you defend the back, how do you attack the back, and spider web control, that kind of stuff. So they're doing a lot of positional sparring. So I got a couple of rounds in, but I just wanted to roll. So no, but generally speaking, no, didn't get much time to train.
Yeah, it's especially understandable if you were about to carry your gi in the bag everywhere, because it's quite big and
absolutely.
Yeah, so it's just better to know.
If you want to boost your online presence, check out our digital marketing agency called Trailblazed. You can also enroll in our Skillshare course called The 10 Tips on How to Succeed in Your Creative Career, which was inspired by the podcast. Lastly, make sure to subscribe to our weekly newsletter called Creative Spotlight to stay up to date with the show and more. Links are in the show notes. Thanks.
And as you mentioned, you prefer no-gi over past few years. What's the reason for that?
The reason for me, I think, is just the kind of rule sets. I'd say like fairly, not that early. I started getting into leg locks around just after I got my purple belt, 2011, 2012 sort of time, more 2012 actually. And just really enjoyed that. So I'd say that I'm a smaller athlete. So I'm like 5'10", which I probably shrunk a little bit. So last time I was measured when I was about properly at school, I was like 178 centimeters. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if I shrunk a bit now, maybe more like 175. But around that, and I weigh at the moment sort of 71 to 72 kilos. So a lighter athlete. And I just found that, for me, like, I always find that, smaller athletes to kind of beat bigger athletes. Leg locks are a big equalizer, right? So I've always kind of been, from that point onwards, been more interested in leg locks. Then obviously around that 2015, 2016 period, When the Danaher Death Squad started to become really popular. Guys like Eddie Cummings, Gary Tonin, obviously Gordon starting out. And obviously that coincided with the Eddie Bravo Invitational events and those rule sets. It just made me more and more interested. So that's the reason I started teaching in 2018 more formally, because I think 2016, 2017, I was watching all of these events, really interested. But at my club, you weren't allowed to, there was no heel hooks, right? Not allowed to train heel hooks, like very focused on IBJJF rule sets, understandably so, because everyone was competing in the gi. But I found like one other person, I was a brown belt at the time, found another purple belt where I'd put some mats down in my garage. He'd come over and we start looking at some of the heel hook meta, right? Exploring saddle. And then I'd studied some of the source material with regards to Scott Sonnen and Riley Bodycomb from Sambo. And it got to a point like in 2017. I wasn't expecting to get my black belt in 2017, but I got my black belt in 2017. And then it just got to a point where it's like, look, I want to have an environment where we can train some of these heel hooks now, these illegal moves. And I kind of talked to my instructor, said, look, I'd like to run an advanced class just on a Saturday morning. I say advanced because obviously heel hooks, there is a greater degree of risk. So he said, okay, but it has to be like advanced. So I think it started off only purple belts and above. I remember the first class I taught, there was maybe 6-7 people there. But pretty quickly, I think like word of mouth started spreading, and then, it started to get more popular. So then my instructor's like, okay, well, let's extend it out to blue belts. And then, as time went on, more white belts. And I would say within sort of nine months, even though it was kind of an early class on a Saturday morning when most people want to stay in bed, sort of like 8 a.m., within sort of 9 months, we were having sort of 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning, sort of 30 to 40 students. And people coming from, people even come from like other areas. So I think like at the time we would have people dropping in every couple of weeks from a place in Swindon. So Swindon from my gym was probably a good 45 miles away, sort of maybe 65, 70 kilometers away. And a couple of these guys would be dropping in because again, they didn't have the avenue to go and train heel hooks, right? In the sparring. Yeah. And their clubs weren't teaching them that. So we were having a couple of purple belts and brown belts turn up from other areas to kind of train in that rule set. Now, fast forward to 2024 in the UK, loads and loads of gyms are training heel hooks now, right? But sort of 2018, 2019, it was less common. So that's why I prefer no gi, and I like the faster speed of the no gi game as well. I think gi. I've been training a bit more gi recently. I do enjoy it, but gi is definitely slower. For me, that's. And the other thing to mention, sorry, I've broken 2 or 3 fingers, right? From just holding on to grips too long. I've done that over the years, and certainly when I train gi now, afterwards, I feel my hands and my fingers like, they're really sore, and I just don't get that in gi, right? Because in no gi, because you're not gripping material. It's like collar ties, it's 2-on-1 wrist grips, that kind of thing, wrist and elbow. So that's another reason why I prefer no gi.
Yeah, that's completely fair point. And
what do you prefer?
To this, I would say I still prefer gi, but I've been lately feeling fingers quite a lot as well. So I don't know if it changes.
Yeah,
but I like to do both because then I had a period when I focused on gi.
Yeah.
And when I did no gi, I felt, I would say, not insecure, but it was just, I felt I was lacking skills because I was focusing too much on one. So I like to do both. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And based on what you said, does that mean that maybe heel hooks or leg attacks in general are your strength?
Yeah, I would say so. So I live in a town now called Marlow. Pretty town, which is probably about 30 miles west of London, and I've lived here for 4 years now. And I'm very fortunate. When I moved here, and my wife and I bought the house, I didn't realize that there was a BJJ gym, literally 5-minute walk from my house. So
Oh,
I'll go and train at lunchtime later today, and it's a 5-minute walk
mhm.
away. But in sort of 2022, when my daughter was born, I couldn't really make the trip to travel to my old club anymore because it was sort of a 45-minute drive away. With the childcare responsibilities, I ended up like definitely like biting the bullet and saying that I'm going to train at the local club now. I had that conversation with my instructor. He was fine because it's another Roger Gracie Academy affiliate. So it's like, yeah, we're all part of the same family, so go and train there. But
Oh,
I trained there, and again, there wasn't any avenue to train heel hooks there. So like we came to an agreement. Kind of was brought on board as an instructor pretty quickly to teach some of the leg lock stuff. So
mhm.
I would say, yeah, like my highest percentage subs would be kind of heel hook, straight foot lock, and probably guillotine. I would say
Mhm. Yeah,
that's kind
yeah.
of and kind of, front headlock is another position that I've kind of put a lot of time into over the years.
Mhm.
But I would say that like I love it because I didn't feel like I should have got my black belt when I got my black belt. I thought there was glaring holes in my game and definitely felt the imposter syndrome. So I felt that, my back attacks
Mhm.
weren't good enough. I felt that my mount was terrible. I never used to use mount. And I wouldn't say that it's great now, but it's a lot better than it used to be. But I felt like my
I'm
guard.
sure that I'm sure you are just underestimating
No,
yourself.
no, no. I never used to use it. I'll be like, I'm just going to stay in side control. and like I felt that
Okay.
my guard was serviceable, but my guard passing was terrible. Um,
Mhm.
And I think a lot of that was down due to not being able to train as much as I would like. But that's the thing that I love about jiu-jitsu. From a no-gi perspective now, I'd say that in the last sort of 18 months to 2 years, yeah, like my guard, I love passing the guard now. I kind of like being in the top position, probably a
Yeah.
bit more than I like being on the bottom. So like even as a black belt, I feel like because there's so much instructional content out there now, whether that even on
Oh, yeah,
YouTube or
yeah.
Instagram, like you can really accelerate your development and your skills.
Mhm. Yeah. And uh, one more thing I'm curious about, what about your competitive career? Have you been competing?
Now, the last time I competed, so I competed a few times at blue belt, and then the last time I competed, God, was almost 10 years ago, at brown belt. Yeah, I competed in the gi at brown
Mhm.
belt. I had one fight and I think I won it with an Ezekiel choke. So I did compete in the gi. I never competed no gi. Um, but
And
it's
why not? Why not anymore competing?
it's something I'm considering. It's something I'm considering this year. I
Mhm.
I feel like I injured my knee in 2018, but I didn't think it was that bad. I thought it was a sprain.
Mhm.
But there was a loud pop, and it's like, God, that didn't sound good.
So sorry, was it from jiu-jitsu?
From jiu-jitsu, yeah, from jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and I think like a physio looked at it and said, I think it's okay, it's just a sprain, but I ended up taking 2 weeks off and then just, coming back to train
Mhm.
at lower intensity before kind of going up again. But my knee never felt good. I've never really, and I've never really kind of got into wrestling or judo. That's something I do want to look at going forwards.
Mhm.
But I kind of felt like a little bit inhibited by my knee, and then in late 2022, I was just doing a private lesson with a student, and we're just doing this very light sparring, and I think I placed my foot on the mat in a certain way, and I felt my knee pop. But this time my knee locked, right? So I torn meniscus in my right knee, the LCL previously in 2009, but the specialist at the time said, you can manage that. We don't need to operate on it. So I had a feeling
Mhm.
like I've torn the MCL. So I managed to. There's a really good acupuncturist at our gym, and so like
Yeah.
I managed to kind of get an appointment with her, and she unlocked the knee. So then, like through acupuncture after a couple of days. So then I was like walking around, but I couldn't train properly, I would say, at all for a
Mhm.
good sort of 8 weeks. But I was still teaching. But in the meantime, I got to the doctor and said, right, I need to get an MRI scan now. So when I got the scan, they kind of came back to me and they said, yeah, you've got a meniscus tear in your MCL, but you've got a very old injury. You've got no ACL, so your ACL is completely ruptured. So I suspect that I ruptured my ACL in 2018 and been training on it for about
Oh my
5 years,
God.
right? But
Yeah.
the thing is, you don't necessarily need an ACL, right? I mean, that was one of the things that I think one of the dilemmas that Nicky Ryan had recently, right? I saw some B team interviews, and he's kind of, I think he took the decision eventually to have the surgery on his ACL, but then he retore it again. And then he said, right, I'm not having the surgery now. I can cope without an ACL. So, you know, you're able to function. But yeah, it was an old injury. And so, but when I talked to the specialist, I said, look, I mean, you know, like if you want to do jiu-jitsu to like a decent level into your 50s, get the surgery done now. So in April last year, so it's almost, today is the 11th. Actually, funnily enough, tomorrow is a year to the day that I had my ACL reconstructive surgery and the MCL repair.
Oh,
So I had the surgery
okay.
last year. And I would say that I'm still not quite back to 100%. But I kind of got back into teaching sparring, very, very low intensity sparring. And then I've obviously been able to increase the intensity over the last few months. But I got back into it after about 4 months. But I had a good sort of 4 months of doing zero jiu-jitsu because I was recovering from the surgery. But as I'm starting to get better now, to go back to your original question, I am thinking that I've got an itch that I might want to compete at some point soon. Masters 2 black belt, no gi. But we'll see what we get to with that.
I mean, when I release this and it will go live, I guess you will have to. People will have expectations.
Yeah, that's true now. Yeah, I've kind of put it out there, haven't I? So.
And I wonder, how did you feel when you competed as a blue belt or a brown belt? Were you, excited or stressed, or what was it like in your first competition?
My first competition, I had to cut a lot of weight. I think at the time I was, as a blue belt, like 83 kilos, and I looked at some of the guys in my gym who were going to compete at the same competition, and some of them were. One of the guys was 6'5", right, which like 100 and maybe like 196 centimeters, and I was just thinking to myself, like, God, I'm like, I'm way too small to be competing at 82. So the first time I competed at blue belt, I ended up cutting 7 kilos in 8 weeks, I think. Which I managed to do, but I think in that first competition, I felt like I had like really low energy, and I didn't feel strong. So I ended up losing that on points. But I think the times I have competed, I haven't felt that much pressure. And I think it's for me, a byproduct of playing team sports growing up. So I always found there's more pressure on team sports. Like if I mess up here, I've let down the team. Whereas when I have the rare few instances I've competed in jiu-jitsu, I haven't felt that same sort of pressure. It's like if I mess up, it's me, right? It's my mistake. It's not affecting anyone else. It's just my mistake, and it doesn't. There's no outer impact. So, but like I have, I have felt a bit stressed on the day. I think the thing that's made me most stressed about competitions, I'm not sure if you've competed, is that very rarely do they run to time. So they'll be like, your division is going to be competing at like 2:00 in the afternoon or whatever. And I remember the first competition I went to, they said, blue belt 76 kilograms are going to be competing, a 76 kilogram adult competing at 1:30. I didn't have my match until 5 p.m. So, and then you had to weigh in.
That's late.
Yeah, so then you had to weigh in half an hour before. So otherwise it wasn't. Another thing is, no one's eating. So by the time I stepped on the scale, I was about 5 pounds under the weight limit, because I dropped another 4 or 5 pounds that morning. So I think that was the thing that made me more stressed. I think if jiu-jitsu, and the last time I competed as brown, I remember my instructor was kind of like, "Oh, you're meant to be on this time, but do you mind if we bring the black belts, the two black belts divisions forward first?" I'm like, "Well, you're the organizer. I don't have a say in this." So then there was like a 90-minute delay between when I'm like ready now, like I'm psychologically I'm ready, and then suddenly you're told, no, you wait another hour and a half. It's your energy drops again. So I think that's the thing that stressed me the most about the competitions I've competed at. If they ran like a spot on time, then I think I'd feel better. Coincidentally, I remember I did compete once at a blue belt comp, an interclub tournament, and I got the timings mixed up. So I turned up and, I thought I had a good hour, and they're like, no, you've got the timings mixed up. You're on now. And that I actually ended up performing better because, it's like there was no time to kind of be stressed. It's like, okay, like that's fine. Like I just get changed. I'm ready now. So yes, I think the stressful thing is the waiting and the delays.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like you mentioned before that it's not, I mean, it's understandable that it's hard to estimate specific times for all the matches, but for example, if you warm up and you end up waiting another 30 minutes during which you cool down again, and
Absolutely.
then suddenly they call you.
I totally agree.
Yes. Yeah. And with your kind of coaching career, once you started coaching, I wonder how you approach coaching. So, for example, when you got classes, how much do you prepare in advance compared to maybe you just show up and thanks to your extensive knowledge, you don't really need to prepare, or what is like the process behind it?
I like having a broad structure for the month in terms of a roadmap, but then dependent on like questions from the students, I can kind of adapt the lesson plan. So like at our academy, Roger Gracie Academy, Marlow, this month we focus on a different position every month. So last month was back and turtle. This month is half guard. So I tend to like to structure the month by saying like starting with defense, and then so at the moment, like I taught last night. I taught 2 classes last night, very much looking at it from because we're early in the month, looking at it in the perspective of the worst case scenario, like somebody's chest to chest, they've got crossface underhook. How do we get out from here? And then as we progress later through the month, looking at attacking submissions from the bottom. So I looked at a little bit of that in the no-gi class last night, but then looking to attack the half guard from the top, passing submissions, that kind of thing. So I like to have a roadmap. But it's interesting. Like I think I've been doing a bit of study on it recently because I've looked at some coaching methodology from other sports, and I don't know if you saw the recent ADCC West Coast trials.
Oh no, I haven't seen.
No, so an athlete there, DeAndre Corbet, I think he won the 66 kilo division, so he'll be going to the big show in Vegas. But he trains with a club called Standard Jiu-Jitsu, and the coach there is a guy called Greg Souders, and he is interesting. He's taken a very new approach to teaching. So the way that I've been coached and I coach at the moment is kind of, warm up, go through some techniques and concepts, people get to drill them, and then spar, right? Whereas his athletes are, his approach has been validated. Now he calls it the ecological approach because his athletes are doing very well on the world scene, but he doesn't do any drilling. He doesn't show any techniques. His whole coaching ethos, and it's something that I'm going to think about playing with going forwards. But I think I'd start with advanced grades. His whole coaching ethos is no sparring, just playing task-based games. Right. So Kit Dale has got an instructional set on this as well, but it might be that like the example I've seen is like say he'll be working on passing. It'll just be like the game is there's no drilling, no technique. The game is simple. So the person on the bottom, your game is to make sure that the person on the top doesn't get past your knees, and the person on top has to get past the knees. So go, and they'll set a time of sort of 5 to 10 minutes, and then at the end of that game they'll talk to each other. And then they'll go into students will give each other feedback, and then they'll go into the next game. The next game, as part of the progression, might be okay. The person on the top, your goal now is to be able to separate the knee from the elbow of the person on the bottom, and the person on the bottom, you've got to try and ensure that the person on the top can't separate your knee and elbow to get inside position to pass. So they start. So this is kind of a new approach, playing these like mini games, or what some coaches in other sports call like a constraints-led approach, right? So like if you look at say football or soccer, I think what they've been doing for years is like things like playing games where you're only allowed 1 or 2 touches on the ball before you have to pass it or shoot, right?
Yeah.
So you introduce some constraints, or it could be that you've got the same amount of players, but we're going to reduce the size of the pitch by 20%, right? So then there's more constraints, right? So it's interesting because, like, obviously this sort of approach is popular in more well-funded sports, and it's starting to now gain a bit of a foothold in jiu-jitsu. And I think for me, that's something that I'd like to experiment with at some point soon.
Yeah, yeah. As you've been speaking, you really made me think and reflect on our gym, because firstly, you mentioned what you trained this week and the previous weeks, and I feel like we actually do the same.
Yeah, that's good.
We had we have half guard this week, and we had back take, and before turtle, and I think you said the same.
It was, yeah, exactly the same. Yeah, I don't know what next
Oh my
month is going to
God.
be, but yeah, that's a coincidence.
And then, as you talked about these games, I think we've been doing that a bit as well.
That's good.
Not for the whole session, but in the first half of the session, some of like little games. And to be honest, I enjoy it because I feel like it's something different. I mean, I'm not a child anymore, but I enjoy this type of games. So it just sounds great to me. Yeah.
Well, the theory around it as well is that it creates a shorter feedback loop for the student, right? And so, like, I think that makes a lot of sense because, say, for instance, like, a lot of what I'm trying to do in my game at the moment is develop a no-gi De La Riva game. So I feel very comfortable in reverse De La Riva on my back, but if somebody starts passing to the other side of my legs, like, I feel like my De La Riva game is weaker, right? So I'm working a lot on, like, off balances, leg entries from there. I eventually want to be able to explore some no-gi berimbolos, right? But let's say, for instance, I go against somebody in a normal sparring round who's of equal skill or better than me. I might try, like, the initial off balance, and then he kind of escapes that and then starts passing a different way. And then for the whole 5 minutes, I don't get to work on the thing that I'm working on because now he's, like, either past my guard, he's trying to knee cut me in a different direction, right? So so then the whole time's gone, and I don't get any feedback on that, right? Like, other than the first 20 seconds I went for it, I lost it, and then we started going through or cycling through multiple different positions, right? Whereas I guess the other benefit of a game is, like, if that's the game, once somebody wins, you reset the position, right? So, like, so for instance, like, what I should probably be doing at the moment with another like-minded student is, like, right, the game is you've got to try and just maintain your base, and I have to try and off-balance you in some sort of De La Riva guard, right? And if I can't off-balance him, then he wins the game. If I do off-balance him, I win, we reset and go again, right? We set a timer on, and then we sit. Joseph Chen talks a lot about this with his teaching. He's very, Joseph Chen from BT, he's very much a proponent of, he likes people having 2 to 3 minutes in between their roles to discuss with their partner what worked, get the feedback, right? So I think if you create that shorter feedback loop, then it allows you to become more skillful, right? And then you can develop the other advantage of, as I see it, of these kind of task-based games is that it allows the athlete to develop their own movement solutions, right? Because no one position in jiu-jitsu is identical. Even if you're against the same opponent and you put your leg in a certain place, it won't be exactly identical to the way that you did it before. So you have to be able to adapt your movements to kind of achieve the same outcome and deal with the variability.
Yeah. And I completely agree. And I think the great thing is that, as you said, when you do this exercise with your partner and then get the feedback immediately afterwards, it kind of makes it easier to understand or just to internalize it. So,
I agree.
Yeah, definitely.
So I need to experiment with more of this stuff, but I think it's where coaching is going to start to migrate in our community in the next year or two.
Yeah. So based on what we discussed, it sounds like coaching is something that you enjoy. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. So whether that's jiu-jitsu, whether that's now coaching other sales professionals from a mindset point of view, it's something which I find very rewarding now. Whereas I frankly, I didn't feel that same sort of satisfaction in my old career, you know. So yeah.
So it's great that you found it then. I'm sure it wasn't probably easy decision to make such a career change, but
No, not an easy decision at all. Yeah.
And Chris, being aware of time, I would suggest to finish for today.
Yeah.
And definitely do the second part, because conversation about jiu-jitsu was so engaging that it took longer than I expected.
No, absolutely. I'll be happy. I'll be happy to do. And probably, like, we probably haven't fully finished the conversation on jiu-jitsu. I feel like you and I could talk about jiu-jitsu all day long. So yeah.
And I also, besides discussing your career shift and what you do now and the coaching in general, which I'm also interested about, I need to have time to talk to you about your beautiful art as well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'd be happy to discuss that as well.
Yeah. So just to finish, can you promote yourself, maybe where people can follow you or connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So from my perspective, in terms of my mindset and sales coaching, my business is called EXP Coaching Ltd. So more than welcome to kind of check out my services on my website, which is www.expcoaching.co.uk. If you're interested in my art, I don't really put any kind of jiu-jitsu techniques or teaching on there, but if you're interested in my art, then my Instagram is @ongi84. But yeah, that's kind of where you can find me on socials.
And that's definitely worth checking, because I think it's perfect.
Oh no, thank you very much, Thomas.
I really like it. So yeah, let's finish for today. We will do the second part. I want to thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. I really enjoyed it. And I will stay in touch. And in the meantime, wish you good luck with everything that you do.
Yeah, perfect. And thank you for being such an accommodating host, Thomas. And absolutely have a great day. And I look forward to catching up with part 2. I can't wait.
No worries. Thank you, Chris, and speak soon.
Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app, get in touch to provide your feedback, or share any ideas for future guests. Thank you, and see you soon.